What's up, guys? Today, we're going to talk about something that's really important, something that always comes up throughout anytime we talk about this on the podcast or on the blog. Just amazing amount of views and amazing amount of feedback. So today, we're going to talk about what you can do if you're on the wrong path, meaning you're not doing what you were intended to do in the world, and what you can do to start moving towards getting on the right path. All right, we are back. Got a new friend joining me today. A man that I have to respect the beard game. All right. I was just telling him Curt Mercadante is joining me today. I was just telling him that I have gotten every fall I get into beard mode, right? It's the fall season, it's no shave November or whatever. And I always get like a decent beard going. And then I get to a certain point where I turn back and I'm like, this is as far as I go. But you have gone beyond that threshold, my friend. Very impressive beard. Mr. Curt Mercadante, welcome to the show, man. How are you?
Thank you so much, Chris, for being here. And yeah, as we mentioned, I've seen some recent pictures of me just from a few years ago. I grew this beard it would have been 2016 for November, and just kept growing it. And people asked me why. I said, the beard represents freedom to me. At the time I had a client, like, she's going to be mad. You better cut that. And that sucker just kept growing. So yeah. Appreciate it.
At this point, it's your own form of rebellion then.
Exactly. And now my logo, my branding's built around it.
Your branding incorporates it now, which is very wise.
I can never shave it. And I told my wife, she said, well, you can never shave. I said, yeah, I guess due to my logo, I can never grow hair in my head either. She said, well, that's not really up to you. So
now, has it been a positive thing with people that they've received it well with you doing the beard, or?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I used to have an agency. And so, a lot of clients in DC, Chicago, New York.
Yeah.
And once you go north of the Mason-Dixon line, people are like, oh, what are you? What is this?
Yeah.
And the more they question it, the longer it would get.
Yeah.
And everyone's cool.
The reason I asked is that was a tough kind of paradigm shift for me. And being, I told you before we started recording here a minute ago that very kind of similar paths in terms of, what both in terms of the work that we do, but also what we were doing prior. Right. And kind of how that evolution took place, that wake up moment of like, I built a prison around myself and I don't really like what I'm doing. I need to go do something that I do enjoy. Right. So very, very similar in that regard. But I remember kind of coming from that corporate space of, I wore my dress shirts and my vests and the whole shabam, right? Because I was pitching companies that were way larger than my own, right? My own startup. And so that was kind of like what that life entailed. And then now, as you can see, I've got my bead bracelets and my hoodies that I wear, and I show my tattoos and stuff like that. And it's been interesting. And you probably said it best: freedom, right? It's been freedom to just kind of explore my own form of expression and creativity and what have you. So I do think it's not only important in terms of for you branding, right, but also for ourselves internally to give ourselves that opportunity to just go out and be like, what do I really want to be? I think it's part of that process. Would you not agree?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when I do workshops and trainings, the number one question the first question I start off with is who are you?
Yeah.
And usually 9 out of 10, sometimes 100% of the people, they answer with a job title.
I was going to say,
I'm Jim, I'm Jane, I'm creative marketing head at wherever, I'm a VP of sales. And it's like, when you came out of the womb, did you have a name tag that said John Jane, VP of sales? No, you are more than that. You're a husband, you're a wife, you're a father, you're a son, you're a brother, sister, whatever it is. And, a big part of what I do is knowing your truth, living your truth, speaking your truth, and defining a clear vision for your life, that guiding star that where you're going. Because a lot of people, I was there, and it's a constant struggle, bounce around from objective to objective or career move to career move, relationship like a pinball without that guiding star.
Yeah. Well, you say that, and that's an interesting topic because anytime we post anything remotely related to passion, path, or purpose, the downloads, the blog views, everything just takes off. So I know it's a really important topic for a lot of people, and it's kind of something that they're maybe in a little bit of turmoil about. So let's backtrack just a little bit because I want to get into all that. But first, I think you've got a really incredible story. We always start in the show with talking about stories and kind of people's backgrounds. I know I've kind of alluded to it here a minute ago, but give us your long tail version of that story, 30,000 foot view.
Sure. So I've started 3 successful companies, all did 6 figures in year one. One was a PR and ad agency that I scaled over 13 years. And I shut it down several years ago because I was unfulfilled at peak revenue. And it had been a journey that had been growing for some time. About 4 or 5 years into my agency, we were making great money, about $500,000 a year. It was a 2-person agency. And I was overwhelmed. I hated it. I wanted to give it up. Even though I worked at home, I would disappear into the home office early in the morning. I wouldn't see anyone. I would come down for dinner. I'd share dinner with the family. I'd go back up. I'd wake up at like 6:30. I'd do it all over again.
Yeah.
And I did a number of things that related to true productivity. I fired half my clients. And I cut my workday in half. And I actually pushed it over 7 figures after I fired half my clients and cut my workday in half.
Yeah, that works.
So I got freedom, but I didn't have fulfillment. And I didn't know why. You talk about purpose, you talk about that. I didn't have it. It was like, where am I going? And in 2012, my dad passed away. Mm-hmm. And my dad, I talk a lot about superpowers. It's actually part of my training program and part of what I call the Freedom 5. But my dad was like a real life Tony Stark. He worked on the space program. He worked on, he led the team that designed the electronic switches in the Boeing 777. He told stories about being in the desert. He worked for Honeywell and designing these fighter jets and having them fly overhead. My brother told me that my dad told him a story once of designing this cool shoulder fire missile, right? And he did all these things, never talked about it. Some of it I found out after he passed away.
Interesting.
But at his wake, you had these grown men, 80 years old, tears streaming down their faces. Not one person mentioned my dad's career or any of those things I just mentioned.
Interesting.
It was all about father, husband, volunteer at our church. He was president of the local University of Notre Dame club. All these things he had done, and I sat there and it was like a slap in the face. Here he had set this example for me. He was my hero. He was my mentor. And I was not living that example. I was in the midst of having really bad anxiety attacks. I was on a number of pharmaceuticals. There was a day when it was pitch dark in my bedroom. I was rocking back and forth on my bed with the lights off. My wife came in and was like, "What the hell's going on? Are you okay?" And I told her she had to get, at the time we had 2 kids. "Can you get the kids out of the house? I can't even stand listening to them."
Oh my God.
And I knew I was having an anxiety attack. Didn't really want to admit it. What's wrong with me? And I felt guilty because I felt that I was the man. I was supposed to be a paycheck provider. We were making really good money. What did I have to feel guilty about? And that's a problem where a lot of people say gratitude is so important, but they bastardize the term and instead use the term gratitude as an excuse for guilt and stagnation. And like I did, they feel guilty for wanting more. And it's not just about vanity trophies or awards and money just to make money. I'm a capitalist, but it's not, money. I look at money differently than I do now. Mm-hmm. When I say more, it's that life of freedom and fulfillment that you wake up in the morning. It could be a tough day. We're all going to have tough days, but you're doing what you feel you were put on this earth to do.
So here's like the $1 million question for you, right? And,
yes.
and it might be such a loaded question that it takes more than what this conversation can provide. But
Sure.
but here's the way that I analyze it, because I hear people, and like I said myself, I found myself in that situation. Obviously, your story, you had an amazing example. It seems of someone that really just lived that life, right, of just freedom and fulfillment and pursuing exactly what that person was intended to do in life. So, how do people, or I guess in your experience, how did you find yourself, quote unquote, getting it wrong or on the wrong path, right? And then to be able to even recognize this is not for me, right?
Yeah, I think, not that I think, I know that when I mentioned earlier, I start off my workshops and trainings with the question, who are you? Mm-hmm. If you had asked me that even in 2015, I don't know that I could answer that question. Mm-hmm. I didn't have a clearly defined vision for, when you're a kid, you ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? Somewhere along the line, people stop asking that. We stop asking that question of ourselves.
Sure.
And we start settling for, I'm making $1 million. Let's do it. I think my purpose now is the $1,000 steak dinner, the $2,000 suit. That feels really good. But then you realize you're snapping at your kids. You're asking your wife to get them out of the house. You're not seeing your wife. You're on all these drugs. You're 40 pounds heavier than you were a year before. All these things start colliding and you realize I'm miserable. A lot of people listen, there's a lot of people who are big D depressed. Sure. Clinically depressed and all that, but there's a lot of people who throw around the word depression.
No, right.
And at the time I feel like I was depressed, but it was a series of lifestyle choices I had made.
Interesting.
Again, I didn't have a clearly defined vision. I needed to find it. And I kind of bounced my way into it to find out where I am now.
Yeah. And see, that's the thing that I wonder is it so, especially as an entrepreneur, because you have so many different directions. And so I can only speak on my own behalf for my own story, but being in college and seeing my friends kind of know what they wanted to do in the world, and me going into my senior year and still not really knowing, I ended up just kind of choosing something that I fell into, right? Because it was just like, well, I need to pick something, right? And start there. So I guess that is like the difficult aspect of this is it, my wife says this, I've said this before on the show. She says, clarity doesn't strike, it unfolds, right? And I think that's a brilliant way of saying it, and because it's very true. So would you say that your experience was necessary for you to discover what you ended up discovering in terms of what you wanted to be doing in the world, which is the work you're doing now? Or do you think that you could have potentially, I don't want to say skip that part of your life where you built these other businesses and these other ventures, before recognizing or realizing that? And then further also too is, had you done that and skipped that, would you have had the same knowledge and clout in terms of an acumen as a business person to be able to do what you're doing? So you see what I'm saying? It's difficult, especially as a person of faith, to recognize what's intrinsically a part of God's plan and what we're getting in our own way, or we are disrupting that plan, or kind of taking our own path in that plan. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a mix of all of it, right? I'm not someone who ever has regrets because, as you said, it's all part of the journey and it's all part of a learning experience.
Yep.
However, I kept going after my dad's funeral, or after his wake and funeral. I knew I needed to make a change, but I didn't know what it was.
Okay.
So I went on for several years. Around that time, people started to come to me and they say, "Oh, you have this freedom. You've built these businesses. Can you coach us?" Now I had used Gallup Strengths Finder program. I started coaching them in that kind of unofficially. I wasn't certified doing that.
Sure.
I came to realize that when I was coaching and helping people, it was on those days that I felt like I was doing what I was meant to do.
Interesting.
I started loving that and hating the agency, but
interesting.
I wasn't making money on the one, and I was making a ton of money in the agency. And so I had that fear holding me back. And so that went on for years until 2017. It kept building to a head, and I knew I wanted to get out, but I just couldn't do it. It was holding me back. I was in that prison. I couldn't escape.
Yeah.
It was Thanksgiving week. I had told my clients I'm taking the week off.
Mm-hmm.
It had been it kept building. I woke up on a Tuesday morning. It was just like any other work day. The problem was it wasn't a work day. It was a vacation day. I had told everyone I was taking the week off, but that didn't stop them from get us that report, hop on this conference call, do all this.
Of course not.
Something clicked. And I said, I'm done. And I went to my wife, Julie.
Interesting.
Worried, right? And I said, I'm done. It's over. And she looked at me and she said, it's about time. She had seen it eating me for years. The kids, snapping at the kids, being grumpy, not being mentally and physically present. Mm-hmm. Now, I shut my agency down. It had been I had a 3-year plan to ramp it down and ramp up the coaching, turned into a 4-week plan. Jeez. I shut that thing overnight. The reason I do what I do now, the reason I have my book coming out, is to help people develop that runway, to start taking action, to use their internal superpowers, to create a vision, not regret where they've been, not regret their journey, to use that as part of the fuel to make a positive change. Because whereas the pain got so great for me, I work with people who a lot of people are pain aware, but solution ignorant.
Yep.
And I do a lot of videos on LinkedIn, get a lot of views. A lot of folks watch my videos, say they're 40, 45 years old, and they know they're in pain. They don't know like I was, they don't know what the solution is, or they feel guilty, and they see my video and they're like, yes, oh, okay, I have a disease, not really a disease, but I have a sickness. Sure. The pain has a reason. I shouldn't feel guilty. And here's a solution. I'm going to give him a call. And so we developed that runway. Was it helpful to me? Were there positive aspects of me jumping in the ocean without a life preserver? Absolutely.
Yep.
But I don't necessarily recommend that when you can build a 6-month runway or a 1-year runway, those types of things.
Okay. I'm glad you say that, because I know a lot of people say you got to burn the bridges. And I don't disagree. I think from a mental standpoint, that's absolutely true. And I definitely think there are some physical, intentional things that you need to do so that I've never experienced anyone, and myself included, that has been successful with any entrepreneurial endeavor that was dipping one toe in. And you know what I mean? Like, you're either in or you're out. Like, this is a lifestyle. Yeah. This is not a career. And so I think that's the difficult part for a lot of people, is effectively making that transition, establishing a runway that actually is intentional, not and then feeling like they are fully committed to it when they're still in whatever it is that they're still doing. Right. So how do you
Absolutely.
help people? How would you suggest people start to make that transition, both mentally and intentionally, in terms of physical standpoint, of setting that up? Obviously you mentioned financial, and I definitely agree with that. Like, burn the ships, but make sure you've got supplies.
Yeah, right.
Like, don't get yourself stranded with nothing, because when you run out of funding and then you got to go back and get a job, and it's multiple steps backwards. So I'm glad that you say that and you preface it with, look, you need to have a runway, you need to have a plan, because otherwise I see too many people that find themselves in even deeper pain. And I also think too, and I'm gonna let you talk, I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot here.
No, please.
So sometimes the pain that they're in, there's a healing period that coincides, or that is subsequent to that pain, right? It's a process of discovery. You and I were talking about growing out the beard and kind of that path of discovery, and letting your personality kind of manifest into this new thing, or kind of growing into what you want. So healing your wound, so to speak, too, not just financial, but also in that regard as well. So kind of walk us through what that should look like for a lot of people that are in that place that you're talking about, where they're in pain and they want to make that transition. They may even know what that transition needs to be, or what that thing is going to be at the end of the road.
Yeah. So I have a process. It's called the 5 pillars of the freedom lifestyle.
Okay.
You can apply these 5 pillars. I've applied people, and I've helped people. I helped one guy lose 100 pounds. I've helped people quit their careers or quit their jobs, start a new business. I've helped people 10x their business. You can use this process basically for everything. And it starts with asking a simple question. If you could wave a magic wand and be tomorrow transported into your desired lifestyle, no buts allowed. When I mean no buts, hey, we really want to move to the beach by Key West, but no, define it. What do you want that lifestyle to look like? The 5 pillars are this. First is unleashing your superpowers. Each and every one of us is born with innate God-given talents. I call those your untapped superpowers. Yeah. They're your naturally recurring patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior. And when you productively apply those, when you invest in them every day, when you work them out like you would work out a muscle at the gym, you turn them into strengths.
Right.
And so every one of my training programs starts with the Strengths Finder program.
Okay.
But you start using those strengths every single day. And Gallup, 90% of Fortune 500 companies use Strength Finders, individuals, small businesses, almost 20 million people worldwide have taken it. It's about finding what you do well. Your strengths provide clues into how you're most profitable, profitable, but productive as well, efficient. You get into that strength zone. I usually have people take their dominant hand and write 3 times, I use my strengths every day. Then I have them take their non-dominant hand, do the same thing. It's sloppy. It sucks. I hear moans. I hear groans. Often we have ourselves writing with the equivalent of our left hand, or whatever your non-dominant hand is, day in and day out. And so it's more of a grind instead of a flow. Interesting.
Have you found that there's a lot of resistance from people in focusing on strengths? I know a lot of people, there's kind of an ongoing debate about focusing on your weaknesses or just channeling in on your strengths, right? And so I can tell you're kind of more of the ditch the weaknesses and focus on the strengths kind of person. Do you ever see resistance to that with people?
Well, the resistance I see is mostly a misunderstanding of it.
Okay.
And so it's not about ditching your weaknesses. It's not about ignoring them. It's about managing them.
Sure.
So Larry Bird, NBA Hall of Famer, sometimes I date myself when I bring him up. Larry Bird, by his own admission, was a slow white guy who couldn't jump.
I would think that's a fair assessment.
Larry Bird was never going to jump as high or be as fast as Jordan or Dominique, right? Never. He was never going to be as tall as Dikembe Mutombo.
Yeah.
If you had told Larry Bird you were going to be an NBA center, it's just mean, right? You can't be anything you want. Muggsy Bogues, who was in the NBA for years, if you had told them, if you just work hard enough, you're going to be an NBA center. Focus on your weaknesses. Okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to grow. I'm going to get stilts. What Larry Bird could do is he could pass the hell out of the ball. He could shoot the hell out of the ball. He focused on being the very best Larry Bird he was. He amplified those strengths. Now, how did he manage his weakness? Well, he didn't sit around and let himself get fat. He got in shape. He got as fast as he could. So you manage these weaknesses. In business, how do you manage them? You outsource them. You delegate them. Sometimes you just put them off. Sometimes you put them off to next week. I had the CEO of a staffing company who was so unproductive and he's grinding, and I had him do a time audit. And it's like, well, you're spending 3 hours a week on LinkedIn. Why are you doing that? Well, we're a staffing agency. I got to do that. You have a staff of 8. If you're analytical, but you're working as an activator, if you're an activator, but you're working as analytical, put yourself in a position of strength, amplify the hell out of that. You're going to put yourself in a position of doing what you do best. Listen, if you're a one-person shop, are you going to have to do some things that you don't do well? Yes. I make the argument, though, that there are opportunity costs. And if it takes you 2 hours to do something that's in your weaknesses zone that you could hire someone to do, and it takes them a half hour and saves you 2 hours, you're making money. So it's not about ignoring your weaknesses. It's about being intentional about, all right, I'm spending 8 hours a day writing with my non-dominant hand. I want to focus on writing with my dominant hand and figure out how I can manage that. So I think a lot of people think you just ignore it, which isn't the case at all.
Sure. The immediate objection to that is going to be, well, I'm early, I'm a solo founder, and I just got started. So I can't afford to be outsourcing or hiring anybody to be doing these weaknesses that I have. In many cases, I can't even afford a tool, some kind of a software that allows me to be able to automate this process. So do you recommend that people operate under that understanding and have a path? We talked about runways before. Have a path to delegation, a path to sourcing out, knowing that for a period of time with an end in sight, that this is going to be hopefully, right, in an ideal world, an end in sight, where they're going to have to be carrying that load or that burden up until X point.
Yeah, so that gets to number 4 in the 5 pillars.
Okay.
Which, but yes, I mean, the short answer is yes, sort of, but I have a nuanced response to that.
Okay.
The second pillar is vision. Mm-hmm. Having that clearly defined vision for your life, and your vision. And by the way, as entrepreneurs, I believe we are our businesses are an extension of who we are. Mm-hmm. If you have a vision for your life that's going this way, and you're building a business with a vision that goes this way, you will hit a wall. Mm-hmm. And so having that clearly defined vision that pairs your purpose for living, your purpose for having a company, with the impact you want to have on the world and the impact you want to have on your customers. When you know that, that's when you wake up in the morning and you're like, yes, today's going to be a tough day. I gotta trudge up the hill, but it's worth it because I'm doing exactly what I want to do. Life is going to knock you on your butt. Yeah. If you don't have that clear vision, you get up and oh gosh, there's 3 paths. I forget which way I'm going. And that's the way a lot of people live through life. When you know where you're going, it's like, all right, life knocked me down. I know exactly where I'm going. I'm heading there. So defining that vision, Claire Booth Luce, who was an ambassador, congresswoman back in the 30s, actually through 60s, I believe. She told JFK when he first became president, he wanted to do so many things, right? And he was spreading himself thin. And she said, I'm worried that you're spreading yourself too thin. And she said, the lives of all great men, she used the word men, and people get offended by that, whatever. But she said, the lives of all great men can be summed up in one sentence. She called that your life sentence. So if I tell you, he unified the country and freed the slaves, everyone knows, oh, Abe Lincoln.
Sure.
She had a sentence about Martin Luther King Jr. She had a sentence about FDR. What is your life sentence? That vision statement should be 1-2 sentences max that sum up, like at my father's funeral. What do you want to be said about you at your funeral? And when I do workshops, invariably someone from the back end who worked his ass off. Really? Again, that goes back to who are you? You're not just a paycheck provider, which leads into the third pillar, which is alignment.
Okay.
A lot of people use the term work-life balance.
Sure.
And I want you to throw it out the window. I want you to burn it.
I've said that a million times. I hate that term.
So there's 3 facets of life. There's relationships, there's self, and there's work. And the key is you can't separate work and life. There's just life. But there's 3 facets of life, and you have to align them in a way that works for you.
But it implies a trade-off. There's no way you can strike that balance to where one is not is sacrificial to the other in some way.
Right. And that's what alignment is. Balance is you're on the teeter-totter. I'm at work. I'm ignoring.
Exactly.
Here's how a lot of people look at balance. All right. I'm in this project. I'm going to put my head down for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I'm going to ignore my self-care, my wife, my kids, my husband, whatever. But at the end of 2 weeks, it's going to balance out. I'll come home early. I'll take the kids out. If that even happens, often it doesn't.
Yeah.
The 2 weeks turns into a year, turns into 5 years, turns into what so many people are on, which is the 65-year-old plan, which is when I'm 65, I'll retire. Just in my family, heart attack, stroke, prostate cancer, knee replacement, all those plans for living at 65, it'll balance out.
But that's
went
such
by the
a
wayside.
ridiculous proposition that you're going to wait to have fulfillment and enjoy. And maybe this is the millennial side of me thinking like, well, why not have it? Why can't I have it now? And I think in so many ways, I know my generation, I poke fun at that. And I know we take a lot of crap for that methodology. But I think in a lot of ways, it is changing the world because there are many people that are starting businesses for that very reason. Why am I going to go work for someone else for 40, 50 years when I can do this thing for myself and have the things I want now? Like we travel at large. We value experiences and seeing things and doing things, even if it means that we're, defaulting on our student loans and all these other things, which I'm not promoting. And I don't think that's a good idea financially, but in theory, you get what I'm saying. Like we want it now, borderline entitlement. I do think has its positives and its negatives, but I think that's the positives is that we're challenging that previous status quo of the way things were done. And I think, and the reason I bring that up is because I think that's where, and when I asked you, like, where was the genesis point of all this for you? Like, how did you find yourself in that wrong path? I think that's where it starts because there's a lot of parental pressure, not just peers, like I mentioned with like my friends and stuff like that, but also parental pressure of like, you need to get a job, you need to do this, you need to do that, versus pursue this thing that may not be something that is visibly going to be fruitful. Right. Like starting a business is not something that visibly, it's not the safe route, right? So that's why I was asking if that's kind of how people end up down that path. And I think maybe that rebelliousness or that defiance of the millennial generation is maybe changing that paradox a little bit.
Yeah. It like you said, there's trade-offs, right? I mean, there's, a lot of folks who are older, look at millennials and they are entitled. They use the term snowflakes. At the same time, to your point, I think that we're not going to settle for being unfulfilled is important. I think that the older generation, there is a benefit to having toughness, to being able to take a literal or a figurative punch.
No, it's crazy.
However,
for sure.
I think that so many people, I lift weights a lot. I box. Throughout my life, have, pushed through pain. There's good pain, like soreness. I'm sore. And there's bad pain. Like I just tore my quad, but I'm going to do this squat anyways. It's like that with life too.
Yeah.
You have to know the difference between being tough and being stupid.
Yeah.
And saying, listen, I'm in this career that's killing me mentally, emotionally. My relationships they suck, but I'm going to tough it out. Yeah. And so there's that. You got to pair that toughness, but be tough on the right things.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. And I think you just brought up something that's a really, really valuable point because there's a lot of entrepreneurs that are doing something that you talked about alignment, and I love that word. I think that's the perfect word to use. They're not in alignment with what they want to be doing or what they should be doing, what they've been designed uniquely to do, right? But I think sometimes it's the assessment thereof, right? So it's recognizing, yes, what is this pain? Is this temporary pain? But I'm on the path. So it's not as clear sometimes as we'd like to make it, right? So for example, in your situation, how would you have known that pain meant you were doing the wrong thing versus this is just the pain of growing a business, or this is just the pain of, hey, right now, this is my thing, but I'm doing too many of those things that are deemed weaknesses. And that's kind of stripping my zest for what I did before. Because many people, and one of the things we're going to talk about coming up here is building a life around your business, not a business around the other way around. Build a business around your life, not a life around your business. And many people get that wrong. And that's where words like, I built my own prison come up. And it's crazy you say that because that's exactly how I described it. I literally built my own prison wall and I work for a lunatic, AKA me. Right.
right. No, totally.
But it was really hard for me to determine in that moment, do I hate this thing or is it just the phase of, and I always told myself, once we get over this hurdle or once we get to 5 million and we got a $7 million valuation and I still didn't feel any different at all. I still hated it, what I was doing. And then I had that moment, not dissimilar to what you had, where I came to my wife and I said, I'm done. F it. I'm done. I'm doing something else. And so that's what I'm trying to get to is how do we be able to disseminate those feelings and that pain and wanting to have the grit that's required to be a successful entrepreneur, but also recognizing and having self-awareness to know this is the kind of pain that's saying do something else kind of thing. That's so challenging to navigate those things. You know what I mean?
It is something I see all the time. I've had, I'm doing one in a couple months. And then I had one last year, a personal branding course.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so interesting. As part of the personal branding course, it's about being really authentic, not the fake authentic that you see out there a lot.
Oh, sure.
And so it starts with you about your superpowers, because those also tell you your strengths and superpowers, how you influence others and how I influence you. You know, that's fundamental to building a personal brand. But then also defining and asking that question, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people who come into the personal branding course who end up, oh my gosh, it wasn't a personal brand I was after. It was like self-awareness and what I really want to do.
Interesting.
I had a client last year who had built a successful business. It was a t-shirt business. They made like 1.2 million their first year, went up from there, and then it collapsed. And it took us some digging.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, he had a strength that was called developer and some other complementary strengths where he loves to solve problems. He would love to get in there, diagnose the problem, and solve it.
Mm-hmm.
And here he was with this issue with this company. And I'm hearing like he kind of knows how to do it. And I said, you know, do you know how to solve this problem? And he's like, I don't know. You know, he was afraid to admit it. Finally, he admitted, Curt, I know exactly how to solve this problem. I know exactly how to fix the company. Finally got to admit, I don't like it. I don't like the company. I don't want to fix it. So I could spend all this time fixing it.
Mm-hmm.
So many times it's having someone outside of yourself. It doesn't have to be a trainer. It doesn't have to be a coach, asking you the question like, do you even want to do this? And often that simple question is like, by the same token, there's a number of people who come in
mm-hmm.
and they want to be more productive. I have some productivity courses.
Mm-hmm.
And they come in about being productive and they take their strengths finder and they're going through it and they realize nothing in this business, in this job I'm in, is allowing me, my boss, everything to work in my strength zone. I got to get out. I got to find something else.
Mm.
So there's a lot of self-awareness. A lot of it is just having someone else ask you those questions. So you realize, wow, I'm building this business. Like, why? That gets to the vision. Why are you building this business? If it's just, I want to make some money, you're going to run into a wall, you know?
Yep. No, I totally agree with that assessment. And I think that's why, and I've been talking a lot on the show over the past few weeks. I've been doing a lot of deep dive, neurolinguistic programming, like therapy, right?
Yeah.
And the reason being is because one of the things that I discovered, and for those who've been listening, they already know this, but for those that are new here listening, the reason being was that I realized a lot of the things that were driving me were things that stem back years and years and years ago, right? I had to prove myself, kind of bad data. And so turning away from that business felt like I was acknowledging that I had failed. And that meant acknowledging that I couldn't prove myself, you know, to my father, to my peers, to whomever, right? That viewed that like, hey, I was letting them down even. And honestly, it was masochistic and a self detriment to myself staying in there. But I realized I'd stayed there for so long because of this bad data that I had and not willing to step beyond that to preserve, you know, call it ego, call it whatever, right? And step away from that. So I think a lot of people, they really wrestle with those things, and it's something that has been instilled in them from a long time ago, right? That's just kind of there and prevalent. And it takes somebody, to your point, from the outside looking in to be like, hey buddy, like this is, you know, to shoot you straight about what they envision and what's going on. And sometimes it takes that for you yourself to acknowledge that you're getting it wrong or that you're not seeing something that might be staring at you right in the face.
Yeah, absolutely. And I get, and this kind of segues into the next pillar, the fourth pillar, which is outcomes and becoming radically outcomes focused.
Okay.
You know, one of the things, heck, I struggle with it all the time. On my podcast, I interviewed Victor Antonio, who's a sales trainer, motivator. And I get this question all the time is, how do you know when to quit something or when to stop it? And, you know, I asked Victor and I ask all these people, they're making a lot of money. They're successful. Sure. It's like, you know, I don't know yet. I'm still trying to figure that out. And you have to look at your outcomes. We often base our days, our weeks, our months, our years on inputs. And this goes sort of back to your question too, about, you know, what do you say to that startup? Hey, I can't afford to hire one. I can't afford these things.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, becoming radically outcomes focused is you take that vision for your life or for business, right? You reverse engineer it so that every year, every month, every week, every day. You come up with just 3. If you're doing more than 3, you're doing too much. Just 3 outcomes to win the day. And I focus a lot. At one point, I was running 3 businesses, working 12 hours a week, homeschooling our kids.
Yeah.
And I became so radically outcomes focused that yes, I couldn't afford it, but if it didn't fit my outcome, so what? I can afford that in 6 months. A lot of folks, I get described in an AMA and 10X Factory, which is an online mastermind. Mm-hmm. This guy's like, well, what do? You just waste away on the couch? I said, my days are jam-packed full, but they're full of things that fulfill me. And the problem is that there's a lot of people, I call them hustle and grind pornographers.
Yes.
Sleep till you're dead. Do all this. There are a lot of entrepreneurs, I would say the majority of entrepreneurs, certainly who I speak with, who fit 3 hours of work into a 14-hour day and say, there's no way I can afford to hire anyone to do what I have to do. And it's like, dude, you're wasting 13 hours a day. Mm-hmm. And they're doing things that, why are you doing it? I read it in a book. Grant Cardone said I should do it. I read it in Gary Vee's this. And you have all this list of things. And it's like, if you were going to go out of business tomorrow, if someone's going to take your business, unless you do 3 things, what are they going to do? And when people focus on those 3 things, they realize, oh, wow, I don't have to be doing all those things. I don't have money to hire out and I can't afford that for 6 months, but you know what? I'm just not going to do them. Mm-hmm. And that happens time and again. I did a call with someone today who said, my business is different. We spent an hour going through why her business was different. And by the end, she realized I'm wasting 12 hours a day.
Yeah. You're gonna love this. Cause I swear we were cut from the same mold. I literally say, so I'm literally running an ad right now for a course that I'm selling that is basically juxtaposed to what you need to divorce your taskmaster mentality and focus on what's actually going to move the needle. Right. So just for perspective to show people, this is like absolutely ridiculous. Let me see if I can find it here. All right. So my headline for it is, you're going to find this funny. What if I told you the hustling and grinded method to growing a business is not the fastest route to achieving your goals?
That's funny. That's funny. But it's true. Truth is truth, right?
Yeah. But anyway, so that's such a valid point. God, we could talk for another hour or 2 on that alone because there is such a pervasive thought. And I feel like this is completely off topic, by the way. This is not anything in relation to what we were talking about other than the fact that you just brought it up. But man, it's so difficult to learn where you should get information from. And even on this show, for example, and I'm sure the same thing happens on your show, you have a guest on and they say something that's in stark contrast to somebody that said it 3 days prior to that, right? So we live in this age of information. It's amazing because it has created this opportunity for abundance and people like you sharing knowledge and wisdom, because somebody right now might be in that, oh my God, like I'm doing so much work and we're not moving forward. And I don't know how much longer I can do this, like literally. Yeah. And that's why things like burnout come up, which is what my program's about, is pulling out of burnout, which I myself experienced really horrendously and drove myself straight into the ground. Health was a total disaster. So how do you go about figuring out, hey, these are the people that I need to learn from. These are the people that I need to listen to. Are you looking for certain characteristics? Are you looking for certain traits? Because anybody, it's the great thing and the bad thing about the world we live in is anybody can get on the line and say something. Yeah. And then the bad thing is anybody can get online and say something. So how do you choose who you're going to listen to and how it aligns with who you are and what your values and beliefs entail?
I think it goes back to, I think 2 of the greatest threats to humanity are apathy and conformity.
Yeah.
And I think we live, I know, I call it a rotten tomatoes culture.
Yeah.
Where people don't go see the movie until they see what other people thought about the movie. And I can't express this political opinion because my Facebook friends will not like it. I think it goes back to, and I'll get to how I choose it, but and I think it goes back to what you talked about in terms of millennials. And, you know, I chose a college major, not because of something I wanted to do, because Dad said go to be a finance major. And, you know, I work with a lot of people who are 45 and they're like, I've been living the last 25 years. I think that we need a fundamental shift. And it's not about fake news and it's not about social media. It's about how we develop our humans. And we come out of the womb with a sense of excitement. We're genius level. We love to learn till about 7. And then what happens? We're sent to school. Yeah. And we're told to sit down, shut up. And by the way, if you don't do that, you're put in the corner. And we tell your parents, you have a disorder, go get a drug.
Yeah.
We're raised that way. We have kindergartens shutting down theater programs because they're not college and career ready enough.
No, that's crazy.
That leads, everything is structured. Dr. Peter Gray, he just had a New York Times, was it a New York Times op-ed? He was featured in New York Times about the fact that 17 and 18-year-olds, depression, anxiety, a feeling of loss of sense of control is skyrocketing because from age 1 through 18, everything has been so structured.
Yeah.
Everything is, we're going to take you to football practice. You got to play football because you need the extracurricular to get into college. You go to college, what should I major in? Well, you got to make that decision.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how to make a decision because everything for the first 18 years of my life had been, and so you make that decision, which now sticks with you.
Yeah.
For the rest of your life, unless you make a change. I was raised in a different kind of household where my parents were nonconformists. They told me to, different than today. You punch bullies in the face. You do all the. I worked in politics for years. I used to sit and consume media and get so angry. I had to withdraw myself from the matrix and start looking at things. You have to learn to listen. I love Gary Vee, except for the stuff I don't love. Yeah. I love Grant Cardone when he's talking about sales and doing those things.
Totally.
The sleep till you're dead, all that stuff. There's a guy, Dan Pena. I don't know if you know Dan Pena. He gets in your face. He swears. There's a number of things I don't agree with him on. There are some things I do.
Yeah.
You have to get to a point, not just media, doctors.
Yeah.
Nutritionists, teachers. You have to learn to be a nonconformist, to stop doing simply what you're told. But to do that, listen, you could get pulled from the matrix by, what's his name? I can't remember, Lawrence Fishburne, when he pulled him from the matrix. Or we have to have a fundamental shift with parenting, with schooling, to allow us to stop raising bots, to compete with the bots. That's not a winning proposition. We have to train people, go back to the Socratic method, how to actually teach people to learn like we used to learn rather than memorization, standardization, because I think we're building an army of robots, which is going to be an absolute disaster.
Well, and that's the problem too, is that there's so many fixable issues in our world, but everybody's been so conditioned to just stay. It's like, guys, look, arguing about it on Facebook is not going to fix the issue.
Right.
Someone standing up and doing something. I'm on an advisory board with a gentleman that came in, and he's telling me his story, and he's been on the show. He got pulled over. There was a misunderstanding. He's a African American gentleman, young guy, and misunderstanding. Cop drew his weapon on him. Next thing you know, he's over a license tag issue. He's got a gun pulled in his face, and said, "You know what? Somebody needs to fix this issue." And on both. So what he did was this: he went out and he rode around did ride-alongs with police officers for over 50 hours just to learn their side, which I commend him for that alone, regardless of what he did after the fact, just to understand why this happened and kind of the life of the other side of things. And now he's developing an app, and he's getting a feature on Amazon Prime Video about his story and what he's building. And so I think so many of us have had that. And I love that you say that, because it's all about conditioning and we're a human factory, right? Going through school and all that is 100% just programming to don't think and do on your own. Think and do what I say, what I tell you, right? And so many of our issues, and this goes beyond just entrepreneurship, so many of our issues could be fixed with people that are just saying, you know what, I'm going to challenge that notion, and I'm also going to think outside the box and develop a solution that I myself can deliver on and provide some kind of value, even if it's not worldwide, right? Even if it doesn't affect the entire world, but even if it's just in your own community or in your own home, right? So I think just having that thought process, it just changes everything.
Yeah. If you in Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, they talk about checking your premises, right? When you hear something, instead of accepting it as fact or truth, ask the questions. Elon Musk uses something called, Socrates used it, Aristotle used it, first principles reasoning. Mm-hmm. And so when he said, all right, listen, I want to start building reusable rockets, all the experts said, well, no, you can't. It's $70 million or whatever it is to build a rocket. That's too expensive.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, well, let me ask a question. What's a rocket made of? He then looked at the actual ingredients that went into a rocket and said, all right, the metal alloys, A, B, C, D, what do those cost on the market? He went and priced it out. So he went out and bought them individually and said, well, I'm going to hire people to put this recipe together to make rockets. And he did it, I think it was at 2% of the cost. But when you're faced with something like, oh, I don't have enough money or time to build this business.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that a fact or is that an assumption?
Right.
Ask yourself that question. I don't have enough time to get in shape. Really? Okay. Well, is getting in shape, what part of getting in shape affects or what part of exercise affects your body composition? Well, 20%, 80% is nutrition.
Right.
Oh, well, so you could just, okay. Do you need to run an hour a day to get in shape? No. Oh, I could do 3 20-minute HIIT workouts a week. Okay. You start asking those questions and your assumptions are blown apart.
Yeah.
Or you realize they're fact. But instead of just accepting it, saying, okay, such and such said this on MSNBC or Fox News.
Yeah.
Is it true? Let me start asking these simple questions. You work it backwards. And just by doing that, and by the way, that's how Socrates taught people. That's how we actually learn.
Do you think that's kind of already happening in society with the fake news movement, with all these various things where people are challenging some of these things and kind of going through that evolutionary process of doing so?
I see people challenging it, but I see people challenging it with, that's your truth. I challenge it with my truth.
Oh, and then it's okay. And it's, yeah. So it's become even more polarizing because you've identified with someone or something, but you're just now opposed to whatever it is that someone doesn't agree with as far as your stance and being entrenched in that stance.
Exactly. So let's look at, so the trade issue, right?
Yeah.
I know folks who have been free market, conservative people, which has always been free trade for their entire lives.
Yeah.
Suddenly, they are nationalist, anti-free traders. Why? Because Trump is.
Because Trump said so. Yeah.
And I had a discussion with someone about it, and I said, okay, and then he started quoting the Bible, and I said, well, no, let's ask questions. What's the evidence? What's the evidence? And when it comes down to, you're just a Republican, or you're just a Democrat, or I read this and you're throwing out a fact. It's like, well, check the fact. Mm-hmm. I think people are hurling quote unquote facts. And so it's fake news to combat fake news rather than let's look at the evidence. What's the history of that action? There's a great book called Enlightenment Now. It's by Steven Pinker.
Yeah.
And he describes himself as a liberal, but he has enough stuff in there to make everyone mad at him. And instead, he just starts looking at evidence of violence decreasing, poverty decreasing. He looks at the environment actually getting cleaner. All of this happens as we get wealthier. But he's looking at the evidence. And he talks about the people who argue with him based on emotion, based on, well, that's not what so-and-so said, based on this. And so yeah, I think people are questioning things, but not in a way
using the pure freedom of thought. It's
right.
Yeah, it has strings attached to something else that has taken precedent over freedom of thought, which I think is probably a much bigger issue and a scarier issue if you really think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, not to get political, but I think both sides right now, the left and the right are have been overcome by authoritarian populism, where it is all about cult of personality, and to save the people, you need to anoint the king. And it's us versus them. The them on the right is people to the south or people to the east. The them on the left is anyone making money. And so it's this, I don't, that's not me. And I think it goes to the point, listen, everything we've talking about is you either have an abundance mindset or a scarcity mindset.
Totally.
And I think a big challenge to anyone to overcome fear, to make a change in their life, there's people in our lives, in our society, I call them scarcity pimps. They're the people who, listen, you take a great vacation and you feel bad about posting pictures because what are they going to say? They don't have enough money. They're going to make me feel bad. They're the people in your life who say, must be nice. Oh, you must be doing really well. Or they're the people who are, the relative who says, turn off Shark Tank. I don't like watching that. Don't they have enough money? That type of mentality. And then you feel bad about wanting more. And they say it's gratitude, but it's not gratitude. It's scarcity. So I think it goes to abundance versus scarcity. Once you cultivate that abundance mindset, that's a start. I urge people, when they wake up in the morning, ask yourself 2 questions. The first question is, what's awesome about today? That's gratitude. That's real gratitude. But the second question right after it, what will make today even more awesome? You pair gratitude with forward-looking purpose, and that allows you to have what gratitude's really about. It's not about guilt and stagnation. It's about, hey, things are great, and here's how they're going to get even better.
Now, how did you cultivate more of an abundance? Now, I don't know if you were kind of grew up in an abundance mentality type household. It sounds like that may have been the case, but for people that don't have that, I would argue that if you don't have that and you're in a business, you're probably really doing yourself a massive disservice. I don't think that's like a profound eureka statement that I just made. So how do you cultivate or focus on developing more of an abundance mentality if that's not something that you just innately have been born with?
Yeah, I think the first thing is asking yourself those two questions every single day.
Okay.
Every single day. By its very nature, when you're focusing on your superpowers instead of your weakness, which is what we're taught to do, fix your weaknesses, focus on what you do worse. 76% of parents surveyed by Gallup said that they should focus with their kids almost solely on the subjects in school in which they do worse. And I tell people
that's like literally just thinking that. I was like, what if people just focused on, hey, you're really good at science. Let's just focus on science and forget about the other stuff. But that is what an entrepreneur really should do, is go be the best in the world. It's science, right?
You could be competent. I'm math illiterate. I've had 3 very profitable businesses. It's like telling Usain Bolt, your 100-meter time is awesome.
Yeah.
But you're not going to be allowed to run that anymore because your mile time sucks. Yeah. It's like, well, why? Why does a poet need to be a math whiz? Why does a math whiz need to be a poet? And when you work in your superpower zone, when you have a clear vision, when you become so radically outcomes focused that when you have those limiting beliefs in your head, listen, I'm doing a Freedom Club festival. I got to sell 250 seats. I've sold 650. When I just sit and I stew and I think about empty seats in a room, my scarcity takes over. When I focus, tomorrow, I'm going to put out a post on LinkedIn and Facebook about this. I'm going to send out an email. I'm going to have my speakers send out 5 emails when I focus on that, you focus on that very next step that moves you toward that outcome, that moves you toward your vision and where you want to go. It's hard not to be abundant. Now, if you miss your outcomes day after day after day after day, and that goes to the question of when do you give up? Don't just give up. You may not have the wrong outcome. Look at the inputs that you're employing.
Because that you can control.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And just to kind of cover it real quick, the 5th pillar is flow. And getting in that state of flow is the cumulative effect of the first 4.
Yeah.
Once you get in that superpower zone, you're doing what you do well, it flows. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who wrote the ultimate book on flow, one of the things is having clearly defined goals every day and knowing what it takes to achieve it.
Yeah.
And that's vision. That's outcomes. That's defining alignment, the life you want to live. So all those 5, I used to have a 12 steps and 15 steps. And when you get down to it, those 5 can be applied to building a business, building a life, fitness goals, everything.
Dude, I live my life based on flow. I mean, I do all kinds of really what people would deem kind of eccentric or weird things, like whether it's binaural audio or whatever, like listening to certain tunes, turning off my phone, blocking everything out, closing my door and being like, this 90-minute Pomodoro, I am totally just laser focused on what I need to do. And it's amazing when you look, because I use the full focus planner, which you said big 3. And I was like, duh. So, 3 a day, I'm literally using that. Here's my 3 things and here's my gratitude side. Like, it's just, it's all just right there for me. But man, I'll look at my list and I'm like, I did these 3 and I've done now, and I'm checking my list and I'm like, wow, I did all this and it's only 3:00, and I'm ready to out for the day. So man, if you can tap into that, that is just an unbelievable productivity hack for sure.
When I first started my agency, I came out and I learned that, and this was probably one of the reasons that I didn't like the corporate 9 to 5. It's like, wow, I'm really efficient. I would get my stuff done by 11 or 12. I had 4 clients right off the bat. I'd have my stuff done. Now, I should have gone and hung out with my pregnant wife at the time, who was pregnant.
Sure.
I should have gone for a bike ride. I should have gone to the gym. But people would say, must be nice. Oh, you don't have any work to do. I let the scarcity pimps get to me. And so what did I do? I filled the rest of my day. It's like the guy who asked me the question, do you just waste away the rest of the day? And I asked him, I said, well, what do you do with like your time? He came to admit he gets 3 hours of real focused work done. And the rest of it is.
It's bullshit to say he did it.
He can't even identify. And I said, well, why do you do that? And he said, well, my dad told me that I should work 7 to 8 hours a day.
So that's what you do. You sit there and you just stew, and you're probably spending half the time endless scrolling on social media saying, well, I'm at work, thus I'm working. Tim Ferriss talked about that. I don't know if you heard what he said about it, but he said he said that being busy is basically being lazy, because people keep themselves busy with work that keeps them away from doing the main things that are actually going to move things forward, right? Like they're like, I don't feel like doing this big thing that I should be doing right now, but I'm going to do all these little stupid tasks and stuff and make myself feel good about doing those things and being quote unquote productive. When in reality, all I'm doing is just being lazy from the things that I should be working on, knocking out those big three and moving the business forward.
Yeah, busy. A lot of people wear busy as a badge of honor. I see people they'll post on Facebook or Twitter, wherever, I'm really busy, so I'm not returning calls this week. It's like, okay, great. Thanks, martyr. And Fraser Cameron, Epic Dad's coach, great coach. He's speaking at my festival. I think it's Bill Gates he quoted that said, busy is the new stupid. I mean, busy is an absolute choice. And people come to me, there's some people who will say, well, what about someone who's busy and they're working in the fields in war-torn Africa? It's like, all right, dude, extreme. You're trying to make a point. Great.
Right.
Thank you for the virtue signaling.
Right.
But then I have people who say, well, my business is different. And after an hour on the phone, a time audit over 3 days, it's like, you know what? There's a lot of fat in your day. Yeah. So it is, I had one guy, he started at a job. It was a manufacturing plant, but he was in management in LA. And he said 6 hours a day, they wanted him to go 6 hours of meetings. And we just got him to the point where he just stopped going to the meetings. And like one at a time, kind of rolling back. Finally, his boss was like, did you go to them? No, you know what? I really had to get my outcomes done. It got to the point where he was so productive at getting it done. His boss was like, all right, fine. I don't care.
No meetings. Yeah.
And like 90% of meetings are
fluff.
So, but you got to identify those inputs in your life. And, Tim Ferriss big on Pareto principle, find the 20% of inputs and bring you 80% of the way to the outcomes.
Yeah. And I think, so you said to start off, and as we wrap this thing up here, I think it's really important to give people permission to tap into that rebelliousness, because I know for me, that's what it was me challenging, even as early back in school as saying, well, why? Teachers would tell me something, why? Like challenging. And I think some people just assume that to be truth or assume it to be whatever. And I think, why should you have to work 12 hours a day if you could do it and be productive and move your business forward in 6, right? Or however many hours or whatever. So I think it starts with, and I made a pretty bold statement to my wife, and I'll see if you agree with it, but I said, I think that one of the most prominent or necessary parts of the equation in becoming a successful entrepreneur is having a degree of rebelliousness, is looking at something and saying, screw that. I don't agree with that. This is something that I want to explore that's different. I think if you don't have that, you just end up blowing in the wind and just conforming to whatever it is you can latch yourself onto.
I agree with you. I extend that out, not just to entrepreneurship, but I think everyone would be better served to do that. They would get out of toxic relationships. They would get out of toxic careers, toxic jobs. Yeah. And again, because they stick in there and they're like, I'm supposed to do it. Life sucks. That's what you're supposed to do. And then you die. It's like, no, have some rebelliousness. Be yourself.
So crazy to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You said, the question you said is ask yourself why.
Yeah.
I love that. Pair it with another question. The follow-up question is, why not?
Why not?
I want to live this life. I want to travel the world. I want to do.
Why not?
Why not?
I think about that, man. The people, they want to go see the world. They want to go explore and do things. And they say, well, I can't because this. And I'm like, man, if that's such a depressing place to be. Like, why not do what you want to? And it's so much easier to sit there in theory and say, well, go do it. Right. But it's always that you have to shift that mindset first to understand that why not that you're talking about. I'm glad you added that on, because that's a really important factor to that whole equation is why not? Why is that not possible? And then, and you said something too earlier about reverse engineering. And this really, I've done this exercise with people and it blows their mind. It's like, let's sit down and actually look at your numbers. Where do you want to be? And how much of these units or whatever it is that you sell is going to take for you to get there? And sometimes it's like, dude, if I sold 12 of these a day, I've got a 6-figure business or I've got a 7-figure business, right? Which means I'm making $12 an hour. I think I did the math. I think literally if you make $12 an hour, an average of $12 an hour, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, that's $1 million business. So when you break it down to that, it's like $12 an hour. Like that's not that bad. I could sell whatever I sell, even if it's an online digital product for $20 and I can, sink in Facebook ads and ad costs. If I can get sales for $8 selling it at 20 and that runs all day long, there's your $1 million right there off of a simple $20 offer, right? But people, I think they put these perceptions in their life about what is what is achievable or what's a glass ceiling and what's not a glass ceiling, and kind of don't reverse engineer and figure out what does the path actually look like to achieve whatever it is that I want to achieve.
And you know, when you do that, you start measuring it. And Peter Drucker said, you don't manage what you don't measure.
Yeah.
If you don't manage if you don't measure it, you can't reverse engineer it. You know, back to our discussion about outsourcing and delegating and hiring people to do things. When people say, I can't do that, I don't know my, I ask, my follow-up question is, what's your P&L and what's your expense to revenue ratio? 9 times out of 10, entrepreneurs have no clue. And it's like, okay, why don't we start measuring that? Once you start measuring that, you realize, wow, I'm wasting money.
Yeah.
And wow, I have money to hire people.
Right.
But it's a fundamental question. And when people say, I'm too busy, I can't hire people. What's your P&L? I don't know. All right, boom. Let's figure it out. And I sometimes I get them a bookkeeper. I get them an accountant, and they're like, oh, this has changed my life. I have so much money. Or I just cut 10% of the expenses out simply because I know what they are now.
Right. No, so. It seems so easy, but I do understand when people are in that. It's just, you know, we've been, like I said, like we've been talking about, we've been so conditioned to operate and think a certain way. It's just difficult to adopt an entirely new way of thinking, particularly when you've reached certain ages where it's been so ingrained as far as what it is that you do and what it is you've been taught to do. So anyways, man, we are flat out of time, and I've kept you a little bit long, so I apologize for that.
No apologies. This is fun.
Where can people go to learn more? I know you've been talking about the book and the 5, what was it? The 5 freedom.
The 5 pillars of the freedom lifestyle.
Got it. All right. So where can they learn about you and the book?
Yeah. So go to the website, 5pillarsofreedom.com. Mm-hmm. It's a landing page on my website. So if you want to check out the rest of my content, you can do so. But at that book, it's being released September 24th. You can sign up for updates. You can sign up to get the first chapter free and start getting that sense of superpowers, vision, alignment, outcomes, and flow to get on the path to freedom and fulfillment in your life.
Love it. Awesome, buddy. I enjoyed the conversation. I feel like I had a kindred spirit with me here today.
Yes, absolutely. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, buddy. Bye-bye.
Take care.